All right. So I've been doing DAO-related stuff since about 2018. And I kind of, to be honest, got a little frustrated and a little disenfranchised with the state of DAOs about a year ago. The DAOs that I was active in ran into some issues involving governance and funding and things like this. And I kind of began to feel like we didn't have the tools we need, or kind of the ideas were not mature enough. And I kind of focused on other things for that period of time. And then very recently, two things have kind of brought me back into the fold, brought me back into the DAO ecosystem. One of them is just, I think, the fact that the tools are much better and we have much better ideas around things like governance and just how to sort of operate functional DAOs. There's a lot of really shining examples out there. But the other thing that's gotten me really excited about is the thing that I want to talk about today, and that's the network state. So the idea of a network state, I think probably most people here have had some degree of exposure to it, unless you've been living under a rock or just haven't been on crypto Twitter. But it's kind of a body of work that has been spearheaded by Balaji Srinivasan over the past couple of years. He wrote a book. I'll show you a slide of it in a moment, which I recommend reading. And yeah, I mean, there have been more and more events and things. And I think exploring the intersection of these two ideas of the network state and DAOs is really exciting and really interesting and has a great deal of potential. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. This is really fresh. I haven't had as much time as I'd like to develop these ideas. So I'm hoping this is kind of a dialogue, and I'll share my thinking, and I'd love to kind of hear where you guys are at as well. Yeah, so the subtitle here is Civil Disobedience Inside Outside the System. I think of DAOs and network states as a form of civil disobedience where we are engaging in political acts that demonstrate our degree of kind of frustration with the existing system, and they are a way to to kind of stand up and say, like, we have had enough, and we want to engage in this disobedience, and we want to do so in a very constructive way. I think DAOs and network states are good frameworks for civil disobedience. Okay, so I guess that was the introduction. I thought it'd be helpful to start with some definitions because these concepts change very rapidly and they're not super well defined. So what's a DAO? I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are all DAOists. Obviously, that's why you're here. But even so, like, defining DAO is a little hard, and this definition has also kind of evolved over time. So I kind of pulled some definitions I found helpful. Internet native organizations collectively owned and managed by their members. That's quite straightforward. An emergent form of legal structure that has, hold on, I'm going to move this. An emerging form of legal structure that has no central governing body and whose members share a common goal to act in the best interest of the entity, used to make decisions in a bottoms-up management approach. So this kind of emphasizes the legal structure aspect of it. Commonly defined by these 5 characteristics: flat organization, transparency, open access, democracy, decentralization. We could debate the degree to which DAOs actually put these values and ideas into practice, but I think it's a reasonable starting point. Wikipedia actually has a definition that's not bad. An organization constructed by rules encoded as a computer program that is often transparent, controlled by the organization's members, and not influenced by a central government. Member-owned communities without centralized leadership. So when you read enough of these, some themes begin to emerge. And so I guess I listed the ones here that stand out to me. So first of all, DAOs are internet native. I think that's a given. They have to manage some kind of asset. It doesn't have to be a token or a treasury, but there has to be something like this. I think an important distinction is that DAOs do employ people, right? There have to be humans in some role. If not, it's not a DAO, it's some kind of an AI type thing, which is interesting, but it's a very separate idea. Collective ownership and management. I think that that's also just a key aspect of DAOs. No central governing body. Again, this is what makes a DAO a DAO. This is the D in DAO. Transparency. This is an interesting one. This is not all DAOs. Not all DAOs are transparent. Not all DAOs are equally transparent. But in my experience, this is a good feature to have in DAOs. And of course, we have the benefit that anything that happens on chain or through a mechanism like Snapshot is visible and is transparent. And finally, right, again, it wouldn't really be a DAO if there weren't at least some smart contracts, some rules encoded in a computer program. Otherwise, yeah, it's not autonomous. What's a network state? Yeah, so this flag is kind of like the network state logo to the extent that there is one. And this is also from the networkstate.com. So yeah, here's the book. Again, if you haven't had a chance to check it out, read it, thenetworkstate.com. It's all there. It's like a living app book. I think Balaji calls it a book app. It's full of links and like links to other parts of the book and links to tweets and links to articles. And it's very dynamic. It's really fun to read. If you prefer having a paper copy or like a Kindle PDF style thing, you can get those as well. But I think it's one of the most important like pieces of scholarship that has emerged kind of from the broader crypto ecosystem ever, really. Okay, so what is a network state? Let's try to define that. So there are a few definitions on the website in the book. So the shortest one sentence, is a network state is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. So you can see there's some overlap, right? The highly aligned online community, capacity for collective action. Those are attributes of DAOs, but the rest of the definition is a bit different. There's a longer definition. So I guess I'll just read it quickly. A network state is a social network with a moral innovation, a sense of national consciousness, a recognized founder, a capacity for collective action, an in-person level of civility, an integrated cryptocurrency, a consensual government limited by a social smart contract, an archipelago of crowdfunded physical territories, a virtual capital, and an on-chain census that proves a large enough population, income, and real estate footprint to attain a measure of diplomatic recognition. The book explains that the reason for this long compound definition is specifically to like exclude things that kind of look like network states but aren't. I personally find this definition very helpful. And there's multiple versions of this. So there's the short sentence, the long sentence. There's also a network state in 1,000 words. There's an essay version of it. So go to networkstate.com, thenetworkstate.com to see them. So, okay, yeah, I just kind of pulled out the attributes that were in that previous list. So this is the list of things. Social network, moral innovation, national consciousness, recognized founder, capacity for collective action, in-person level of civility. Again, some overlap with DAOs, but some differences. We'll dig into this more deeply. Oh, sorry, there's more, right. Also, an integrated cryptocurrency, consensual government limited by social smart contract, archipelago of crowdfunded physical territories, virtual capital, on-chain census. So again, you can probably already begin to see that the biggest difference is the focus on things like physical territory and tracking population. These are, again, there are DAOs, by the way. There are, of course, DAOs that are acquiring land. There's multiple land DAOs. And there are also DAOs that track their population in terms of token holders or something and make it public. But most DAOs don't do those things today. Oh, and diplomatic recognition. So this is kind of the goal of a network state. I can't cover all the nuance in the book, but I should point out that the network state is kind of the final form, right? So the way that Balaji describes it in the book, there's 3 or 4 different levels. So you start with this thing called a network union, and you can move up from that to like an archipelago where you begin to actually crowdfund territory. And kind of the final state is the network state. And the final goal of it is achieving diplomatic recognition. Not all network unions or these earlier projects will make it to that level. One other quick point, the idea of an online kind of digitally native thing or community achieving diplomatic recognition may sound far-fetched, it may sound a little crazy, but the book cites there are multiple concrete examples of this. The best example being Bitcoin, of course, right? Bitcoin has now been recognized at the nation state level as legal tender in at least 2 countries. There's a couple of other examples of digitally native projects that have gone that route. This is also obviously from the Network State book and website. This is the network state in a single image, and it's a dashboard that shows basically some of the statistics that you saw a moment ago. So the population size, income, and the total number of square meters of crowdfunded territory. And it starts with one person in Tokyo and kind of expands around Asia, and then it kind of goes global. Again, as a DAOist, I look at this, I'm like, okay, like this feels like some DAOs I'm part of again, except maybe the square meters part. Like the rest of it kind of could be a DAO. So yeah, I mean, this whole talk grew out of me asking this question, like, what would it look like if these two things kind of collided? There's way more of this stuff on thenetworkstate.com. Okay, so those are the definitions. Let's look briefly at the current state of the art on DAOs and network states. And then from there, we'll kind of talk about what happens if the two were to be combined somehow. So what is the best DAO? I mean, this is like, best is obviously very subjective, and there's many kind of different metrics you might use to measure success of DAOs. Not all DAOs are aiming to do the same thing. So I don't in any way, shape, or form want to suggest that like every DAO should care about things like treasury size or market cap, right? Some DAOs like intentionally want to be small or not have those things. You know, but some big projects come to mind, right? You think of Uniswap, you think of ENS, Compound Maker, right? These are projects that govern large treasuries, have quite a bit of participation in their governance. There's also smaller projects like Nouns DAO, for example, that are really, really active. And like if you talk to the members, you just immediately get a sense of like the passion and the how do I put it? Like the shared kind of sense of pride in the project and the community. So that's another metric that I think you could use to measure the success of DAOs. That's a bit hard to quantify. The one I like to focus on is more the governance stuff. Maybe I'm just interested in governance and less interested in DeFi. But like, look at like a Uniswap, for example, right? And actually this goes for, I think, probably all the projects up here. There's both a kind of for-profit centralized company component. Often it's labs, like Uniswap Labs or Compound Labs. And then there's like a DAO component. And so the question that I think is most salient is like, what percentage of the quote unquote governance bandwidth, right? Which is to say the decisions that are being made, the high stakes decisions, how much of that is flowing through the DAO versus through the company? I'm looking at Owaki over there because I know that like you guys are going through this with Gitcoin, like turning that into a DAO. Shapeshift is another project that's like being DAOified. And I think that the goal there is to over time transition from the company side, the lab side, like into more of this governance bandwidth and management of assets and important decisions on the DAO side. And that's not an easy transition to make. If you ask me, the most successful DAOs in the world, okay. So yeah, this is a screen grab of, I forget the name of this site. If someone knows, shout it out. Deep DAO? Deep DAO, thank you. I feel silly, I forgot that. I took this a moment ago. So yeah, so this is some of the metrics you saw a moment ago, right? So the number of governance token holders. So Uniswap has 320,000, that's a lot, right? The size of the treasury, active members. So anywhere between, that's actually kind of interesting, right? 211. But I guess this project is up here. Actually, I don't know anything about BitDAO, but $1.3 billion treasury. That's kind of cool. Up to right 86,000 in the case of ENS. So ENS is a very active DAO. So these are again some metrics you might use to kind of measure success of DAOs and just get a sense of what the largest, most influential DAOs look like. However, I would note that none of these DAOs, as far as I know, are really aiming to achieve any degree of what's it called, diplomatic recognition, nor are they trying to crowdfund territory. Maybe ENS in the sense that it would be cool if it could somehow be the case that your .eth ENS address would resolve using the traditional DNS system, but that doesn't look super likely for a whole host of reasons. But that would be a great example of diplomatic recognition, right? If we could get a top level like nation state style domain for ENS, right? Plugging into like an existing hierarchical nation state based system. All right, so yeah, sorry, going back to the question, my answers would be Ethereum and Bitcoin. Like to me, these are just the obvious winners. Bitcoin was the first DAO. I think it checks most or all of the boxes we talked around before about it being internet native and having active governance. Obviously, Ethereum governance is much more active than Bitcoin's. Having control over assets, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very hard. I mean, market cap obviously is easy. It's very hard to know the number of users, the number of token holders. So these are just like kind of best approximations, but they're pretty big. 100 million people. We know this, something like 100 million people hold or have transacted Bitcoin. Again, it's a bit harder to know with Ethereum, but that's bigger than most nation states. pretty cool. Yeah, and so then the question becomes, how are they doing on the governance side of things? And again, that's hard to measure, hard to know. Okay, what's the best network state? Anyone have any ideas? How would you find out? I struggled with this. So there is a dashboard. This is also at thenetworkstate.com. This kind of looks a little bit like the dashboard we saw a moment ago for DAOs, but it's much less mature. It's interesting because that animated GIF I showed you a few minutes ago that showed the population size, the square meters of crowdfunded territory, et cetera, like those things belong up here. There's 26. Okay, so the first stage, I said there's stages. The first stage is called a startup society. That's the first stage. And then the way it's laid out in the network state, they kind of progress through these 4 or 5 phases, the last of which is the network state. So the first step is the startup society. These are very nascent projects. Some of them are DAOs, by the way. Cabin is Cabin DAO, right? So that's a DAO. Shout out to Cabin DAO. I don't know if you guys are here. Oh, yeah. What else? Kongland, that's also a DAO, right? So that's on this list. There's a handful of others that would be familiar to people here. But I went through and I clicked on the join link. So the join link for most of these takes you to a Discord. Some of them, it takes you to a page to purchase a token or something. Some of them, it takes you to a forum to apply. But there's really not much transparency here in terms of the number of members, treasury sizes, things like that, which is understandable. But it's really early days for network state. So I don't even know how I would answer the question. I think, yeah, this is alphabetical order. It's not even ranked. So it's hard to know the state of the art of network states, but the state is really, really nascent. It's very, very, very new. This all started within the past 3 months or so. So now the fun part. What would a network state plus a DAO look like? That's, I guess, the third and final part of the talk. Okay, so goals. Yeah, so the goal here is to explore the intersection of these two and maybe to try to figure out how we would build something that has the best properties of both both a network state and a DAO. Right, so what does kind of the Venn diagram look like? This is where I started my exploration. So I want to talk about each of these 3 sections, right? So what is a DAO that's explicitly not a network state? What is a network state that's explicitly not a DAO? And this is just the engineer in me. I'm trying to be very rational about the approach. And then what does the intersection look like? So a DAO that's explicitly not a network state. So it's a DAO, but number one, it doesn't have a moral innovation. So it's also referred to as the one commandment in the network state. And it's like a single rule that everyone in the community follows, or a single value that everyone espouses and believes. Balaji's favorite example of this is keto kosher, right? So you start a community where you're we're gonna have 0 carbs, we're gonna have 0 sugar. Everyone who's part of this community, whether they're in person together or far apart from one another around the planet, this is the one commandment, the one thing that binds that community together. I think it's a very powerful idea, but it's not. I guess maybe some DAOs have kind of something like this, but a DAO that's not a network state would kind of not have this. It would not have a sense of national consciousness, so kind of hard to figure out what that means exactly. But you could think of it as I don't know, DAO consciousness. Do you think of this idea of a nation, right, is hard to pin down. A nation, we tend to associate a nation with a nation state, which is to say a physical territory. But there are many nations, like the Nation of Islam as an example, or nations of people who are in exile, like the Tibetan community, right? They don't have a state, at least not a recognized state, but they are a nation, right? What does that mean? It means that they share certain values, they share certain beliefs. And so I think having this speaks to the idea of fostering a sense of nationhood, a sense of brotherhood or sisterhood, or just togetherness among the people in a community. And I think a DAO that's not a network state would lack this. And so instead, what would tie it together is something like number go up, money, something looser, something that doesn't bind as tightly. This is interesting as well, right? A network state explicitly has a recognized founder. And so a DAO that was avoiding being a network state would not have this. This one's also interesting. A network state explicitly has this in-person level of civility. I like this idea a lot. right? Whether we're actually in person together, whether we're doing things remotely, we're on Zoom calls. In fact, we met earlier today, and I was like, I can't believe we haven't met in person before, because I feel like we have, because we've had an in-person level of stability on every call we've been a part of. And so it is possible and important, but not every DAO has this or wants to have this. And then, okay, yeah, lack of physical territory, no virtual capital. Sorry, I don't remember how many bullet points there are here, so I'm kind of like going through this carefully. No on-chain census, no real estate footprint. Yeah, these are, again, things that DAOs tend not to have. And then, of course, lack of diplomatic recognition. Okay, so what is this, right? If we kind of boil this away and look at it, it's an internet native organization that is not only internet native, it's internet only. Like, it kind of stays that way because it's explicitly choosing not to have in-person civility, not to have a capital, not to have any territory associated with it. And that's fine, right? It's not the case that every DAO wants this, but I think it's a powerful idea if DAOs choose to learn from network states. I've heard DAOs called a Facebook group with a bank account. I think that kind of captures a little bit this idea. And I added this squeezed in the corner, like, how do I describe this? DAOs are doing exciting, amazing things, but they're like explicitly not so good today at interfacing with the physical world. And so I kind of feel like for all the amazing things that we're building in DAOs, we're kind of like squeezed in the corner a little bit while like geopolitics goes on around us. And like we have limited elbow room. We can't like stand up and expand and like really grow into our final form and achieve things that DAOs are capable of, as long as we are unwilling or unable to take those steps towards things like crowdfunding physical territory. Okay, so what is a network state that's not a DAO? So this is the other side of the Venn diagram. So it's not internet native, right? DAOs are explicitly internet native. I think a network state doesn't have to be. It can start with a group of friends in a room together or something. It's not collectively owned and managed. Let me just quickly bring these all up. So maybe it's centrally governed. It's not so transparent. Like, this is fairly dystopian to me. And I think that you could argue that this is something important missing from the concept of a network state, because it's too close to the way nation states already work, right? It lacks those special sauce, the special things that make DAOs special, which is the transparency, the accountability, the decentralization, the collective ownership and management, right? Those are the things that make DAOs DAOs. And I think those are the things that we're expressing when we choose to associate with DAOs instead of associating with existing governance structures that we don't feel such a strong affinity for because they lack these features. Yeah, and then, okay, so I guess finally the question becomes, what would a network state DAO look like? So it would have the best of both worlds. It would be internet native. It would have the transparency, collective ownership and management that DAOs have that we love so much. It would lack central control, right? Because you can build a very dystopian, authoritarian network state if you don't have the DAO values embedded in it. It would have a moral innovation and a sense of national consciousness. Again, this moral innovation is this one commandment, this moral idea that ties people together. It could be about banking the unbanked. It could be about financial inclusion. It could be about art. It could be about fun. It could be about just making jokes with your friends. It doesn't matter what it is, but it has to be a thing that people in that community would really stand up for. It has the civility that we talked about already. And this is where things get interesting. It also has physical territory and a notion of a virtual capital. I'm out of time. I would love to talk more about what this would look like and how we get there, but like, we're in physical territory right now, right? And there is a sense, as an Etherean, as a member of the Ethereum community, that I can show up in any city in the world that has a large enough population of Ethereans, fellow Ethereans, and there is a place I can go. There is a physical hacker space. There is a co-working space. There is a sofa I can crash on. I would argue that like we're pretty close to having this in Ethereum. Maybe less in Bitcoin, maybe less in other communities that don't have that strong affinity that Ethereum community has. Yeah, on-chain consensus, real estate footprint, so some transparency around those things, which this is how you gain diplomatic recognition, right? You have to demonstrate that you have the people, you have the funds, you have the real estate. And again, diplomatic recognition. Interesting to think about what that would look like. Again, I'll use ENS as an example. Like, well, how cool would it be if ENS could like insert itself into the global top level domain name system? I'm sure we could come up with many other examples of what diplomatic recognition of Ethereum as a community or another kind of DAO network state would look like. So this is my goal. I hope it's your goal too. When I joined the Ethereum community 5-6 years ago, I kind of saw Ethereum as a operating system to build better human institutions, right? And so my goal all along has been building novel tools, institutions, things that enable humans to collaborate and come together and solve these complex coordination problems better. And again, I think people like Kevin Owocki and Gitcoin and many of the other people in this room are doing massive work through mechanisms like quadratic funding, CLR funding, there's what is it called? Retroactive public goods funding, all these kind of ideas to solve some of these problems and bring about a new era of human flourishing by doing this, because the challenges we face as a collective human society are increasingly challenging. This is kind of the question to leave everyone with, right? Like, how does a DAOist network state help us get there? Yeah, I think the key point here, this is the most important slide in the presentation, so if you take nothing else with you, take this. I think that if we imagine what the next level of, like the next evolution of human governance looks like, it can't just be a DAO for the reasons we spoke about, right? Because DAOs are immature in the sense that they're not doing things in the physical world so well. They're not achieving diplomatic recognition. You could argue how necessary that is. I personally think it's necessary for this thing to scale and like really get us to that era of human flourishing. But it also has to have the properties of the DAO. It has to have that decentralization, the accountability, et cetera. And I really think that this is a vehicle to achieve it. And that's why I think the intersection of these ideas is so important. So this is our goal. It always has been. I'm kind of out of time, so I'll like just breeze through this very quickly. I think the things that network states can learn from DAOs, right? And I want to focus more on the other side because we're DAOists. But things like why decentralization, transparency, accountability, why they matter so much, why they're important for fostering inclusive sense of community and ownership over that community. DeFi, right? Network states don't talk at all about DeFi, and we all know that DeFi is a very powerful tool. It's not sufficient, but it is maybe necessary or a very powerful tool to bring communities together and allow them to find sustainable business models and governance as well. Network state explicitly doesn't talk about like a lot of the novel governance mechanisms that we're experimenting with in the DAO world. And finally, what can DAOs learn from network states? What can we as DAOists learn? So here's the first lesson. Moral innovation and national consciousness. I've mentioned these terms a bunch of times. DAOs, in order to be successful, to scale, to move the needle, they need to stand for something more than number go up, right? Like that's cool, but to get to the next level, we need to have this, I mean, there's no other word for it, national consciousness, this collective identity in DAOs. And I think that we can learn a lot from this notion of a network state, how we might achieve that, what it might look like, how we can find these moral innovations to bring ourselves together around. Second one, the importance of physical footprint, in-person stability. I already kind of spoke about why I think this matters. Some DAOs want to be strictly virtual, and that's totally okay. But for other DAOs that have bigger ambitions, I think that things don't need to remain online forever. I think having a capital, a virtual capital, a physical capital, having physical space, having crowdsourced territory is a very powerful idea. And I love seeing what DAOs that are doing this, the progress they're making. And finally, the sky's the limit, right? I think, again, going back to the metaphor I used of being kind of stuck in the corner, I think DAOs can do pretty much anything. I think that the body of best practice, the knowledge, the tools we have are incredibly powerful, and diplomatic recognition of things like DAOs is both possible and desirable. Thank you. You can find me on, my DMs are open on Twitter, so send me a message there if you want to talk about this, if this is interesting to you. Thanks for listening. I'm assuming we don't have time for questions. Do we have another speaker who's ready? Kevin's next. You're in for a treat. Okay. We can do a couple questions. People have questions. Which one? Oh, yeah, well, I can't because the presentation is gone. Yeah, LRETTIG. or just search by my name, you'll find it. Oh.
What's the TLDR on why a recognized founder is so important for a network state? Why does that matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. Why is a recognized founder? I think it's because, like, to achieve some of these goals, for people to take you seriously on the world stage, right? And this kind of falls under diplomatic recognition. You need a leader. You can't be a country or a nation state that doesn't have like a person who can be held accountable, who can kind of sit down at the table, whether it's the UN or whether it's the World Council of DAOs or something like that. I think it's also about having a person who embodies the moral innovation, something along those lines. I think that's very hard to do in a decentralized way.
I guess Bitcoin would be an example. So like common question. So common, like Satoshi Nakamoto is not really like, is an alias or whatever. So there's no real leader of Bitcoin. But I mean, you mentioned it was like a DAO/network state. So maybe it is possible.
So I think, just to be clear, I think Bitcoin is a DAO. It's explicitly not a network state. Okay. I think it doesn't exhibit those characteristics, among which is exactly having, I guess the question, so it's interesting. It says a recognized founder. It says founder, not leader. So if that founder is pseudonymous or disappears, does that still count? Hard to say.
So my question is, how do you legally protect members of a DAO that the government may go after for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's really hard. Man, this has been like, I was an Ethereum core developer, and there were decisions that we were making like around the economics of the Ethereum protocol that were very controversial, and quite frankly, we made enemies. If we decrease the issuance, the miners are going to be mad. If we increase the issuance, other people are going to be mad. And I didn't feel that I had like good liability protection at that time. I think a lot of like the most obvious example, like the Tornado Cash situation. So I guess I'm saying, like, as a software developer, this is really a question I ask myself every day, and it's really dangerous. I have friends who are working on privacy projects, and in the wake of Tornado Cash, like, they're scared shitless, to be frank. I think the same thing would be true of members of DAOs. There was a DAO just a few days ago that the SEC had an enforcement action against, right? And they said anyone who voted in this DAO could be held liable. So I don't have good answers, but we need liability protection. Maybe the network state would make that possible. Yeah, let's do one more, and I want to hand things over to Kevin.
What do you think are the pitfalls of the, your smiley face overlap between network state and DAOs? Because we've seen pitfalls of DAOs. What do you think might be those of the companies in your overlap zone?
Pitfalls specifically of that middle category?
Right. As you try to build a DAO and a network state, like, what are the pitfalls you think could arise? Probably a lot. I mean, they're pretty different, and I'm kind of going out on a limb here by suggesting that the goal is to like merge the two. I think if you look at the culture that has grown up around the network state, it's like, even in terms of people, it's quite a different set of people, different set of values. Maybe they're more focused on power, more focused on, it tends to be a lot of Bitcoiners in that community as well. What's a good example of a pitfall? I guess the physical territory thing just kind of strikes me as like, that's when things get hard, right? If you have a DAO and you're just moving tokens around or NFTs or digital things, like, that's pretty easy. But the moment you start trying to interact with the physical world, you run into questions of liability. You need shell corporations, you need like known persons, even DAOs that try to just move fiat money around. I think many of us who are part of DAOs that try to like pay people in dollars and things have run into some of these issues. So legal stuff. Lack of accountability. Yeah, okay, I agree. I'm gonna end on this note. So I think if you asked me the key difference between DAOs and network states is network states are built around the notion of accountability. And this is a good answer to your question. Why does it need a recognized founder, a recognized leader? Because that person is accountable. Whereas DAOs are better able, again, some are better than others at this, better able to like dodge accountability because decentralization. So thank you guys again. Great audience. Great questions.